Any veterans in here besides the colonel, the two colonels? Any veterans here? Any ex-military? Okay. 9/11, how old were we all on 9/11? Sir, how old were you when 9/11 happened? 14, sir? 12? 11, okay. So just some perspective. So 9/11 obviously happened, and you know, we've been at war for 10 years, and there's now some lessons because we're pulling back. And one of the key things, and I tell you, I can talk about a lot of topics, and I hope to come back at another time on maybe some other issues. I just spent a year in Afghanistan as a counterinsurgency advisor for General Allen, and 4 years of my life since 2003 have been spent between Iraq and Afghanistan, and now Africa, which is the next phase of where we're going to have to combat some of this extremism. I'm going to be very blunt, folks. I don't mean to offend anyone, but I'm not pulling any punches here in this course. I'm going to touch on religion because this course is about talking about terrorism and driven through the ideology, the Islamic ideology about how they approach kidnapping. So up front, if you're offended by what I have to say, that's your problem, not mine. I don't intend to offend anyone, but I'm going to tell you what I've experienced firsthand, not what I read about, not what I heard about, but what I experienced, and then what I've done looking at the problem set since. And I'm going to go right into it. So, folks, you guys, how many of you guys have seen something like that in the past? Recognize that kind of an image? So, what can you? Anyone just throw out? What do you see there? What do you know? Colonel, you're off the list because you could be teaching the class here. So, anyone want to throw out what you think when you see that? Any comment?
Two terrorists and hostile.
Okay. What else? What else you guys pick up out of that? Anyone, sir?
24.
I'm sorry?
24.
24.
I've seen scenes like that on the TV show.
Oh, 24. Okay. Gotcha. Sir?
They're about to make a statement or convey some kind of message.
Bam. Exactly. Anyone read Arabic or Farsi? Anyone know what that says in the background? Okay. I don't speak Arabic, unfortunately. But that was any other questions about that? Because that's typically the banner. There's always be a black banner behind the hostage. But where do you guys think that happened? Anyone want to guess? I had it up there already, so if someone was looking, they would have seen it. Did anyone know where this incident happened? Anyone want to take a wild guess? Iraq? Anyone else?
Pakistan.
Bam, Pakistan. Kidnappings and beheadings in Pakistan did not occur, and it wasn't part of the culture. It's very against the Taliban culture, but they evolved, and this stuff all comes back to where we're going to get to Iraq. So you're right, Pakistan. This was a Polish geologist, Peter Stenzik. He was out there helping, doing some geological surveys. He'd been in Afghanistan for many years. He was basically one of like many, not a soldier. He was out there trying to help get geological studies to help economically help Pakistan move forward. They don't care that you're helping their country. He's a Western and he's a target. And even though Poland isn't even in the coalition, doesn't matter. And he was taken by the Taliban, and this is in Pakistan, so not even in Afghanistan or Iraq. So he's kidnapped, and next scene was the video that appeared, and we're going to hopefully, inshallah, so we're going to test the sound on this, folks. Sorry, folks.
I would say
okay.
People of Pakistan is very good.
Everyone hear that?
Very good. He has very hard life, but there is normal people, very peace people. I am here so long, I see normal family, normal children, always normal.
What kind of message do you think they're trying to send?
We don't need anyone here. Leave us alone. Everyone's fine.
Yeah. Any other comments? So this guy's making a statement. Pakistani people are very peaceful. I've been here many years. They're very normal.
It's hard to believe with a gun pointed at his shoulder.
Well, read what happened next. And I'm not going to show that video. Pretty dramatic message, and that happened and is still happening today on a fairly regular basis in the Middle East and elsewhere. We're all about defending your right? That's why we're in law school, rule of law. Well, that doesn't apply in large parts of the world. It's called Sharia law, and I don't know if you guys study Sharia law here, but that's a whole different topic here we're not going to get into today. Indirectly, yes. The key message they're sending, victory is gained not by the number killed, but by the number frightened. All right? Mao Zedong said something like that, right? Kill one, no one cares. Kill 500,000, it's a statistic. But they were extraordinarily effective, and this was the message. Victory gained not by the number killed, but by the number frightened. Arab proverb. Okay, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but it's going to give you kind of a, again, right after I left Iraq, I ended up giving lessons learned on this. I was talking to soldiers and sailors, trying to let them understand the threat environment. I ended up in Naples talking to Marines and sailors headed into Afghanistan and Iraq for a tour. And I just left the military. I'm a reservist, so we're kind of a part-time. Sometimes I'm in, sometimes I'm out. So I'm in Naples. I just given a lecture to a bunch of Marines and sailors, and then I got a phone call on my phone. I just got a smartphone, and it popped up, and it was 212. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm getting a call from New York. My phone works. This is kind of cool. Answer the phone, and it was CNN calling up saying, hey, there's 2 journalists that were kidnapped in Gaza. We want to interview you tomorrow. And I said, well, I'm in Naples. And they go, well, can you get back to Tampa? That's where I'm from. They go, can you get back to Tampa tomorrow? I said, no, I'm in Naples, Italy. And they're like, well, we have a bureau in Rome. Can you get to Rome tomorrow? So long story short, this was my first experience talking about this, like, to you guys, this kind of an audience. And hopefully we'll have a better luck with the video this time than, is that going? There we go. Maybe not. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay.
Daniel O'Shea is a former coordinator of the State Department's hostage working group in Iraq. He's in Rome today. Thanks for talking with us, Mr. O'Shea. First, I guess what sticks out to me is it's unusual for hostages in Gaza to be held this long. Normally, hostages are held a couple of hours and then released. Do you think this signifies to you a change in tactics and strategy in Gaza?
It really changes with the scenario. It depends on the group that has them. As it's already been mentioned earlier, the fact that it's an unknown named group really doesn't mean a lot. It's they use that as a kind of to throw off the people that are behind the group, trying to determine if it's one of the factions. Now, again, be it Palestine, this could be an issue between Hamas, Hezbollah, or the PLO. So a group that is trying to get a wedge issue, and by grabbing a journalist, they have the opportunity to get their demands out to a worldwide audience with worldwide attention. But the reality is the demands are not very specific. They're not very realistic in terms of releasing all Muslim prisoners from U.S. jails. But it's a starting point. What's really it's the work behind the scene that's being done, as the Consul General alluded to, that's being done at a complete interagency effort on behalf. I'm not going to do the whole interview, but after Iraq, before kidnapping Central and South America, it was a kind of a dirty little secret. You kidnap the executive, and then they'd start the negotiation, you pay the ransom payment. But after Iraq, all of a sudden, this thing came up. They started putting them out there on YouTube videos, which were, of course, picked up by CNN and Al Jazeera and the rest, and it started to implode. It went from Iraq, 2004 to 2006, the Nick Berg time, to now all over the world, and, of course, in the Middle East in particular. So in my research and coming back and doing my let's see if I can get back to the next slide here. Of both U.S. law enforcement. So this is the definition I've come up with: hostage terrorism. And you guys are legal guys. Tara can probably tell me I'm off base here, but this is my definition of hostage terrorism. Terrorist groups who use criminal act of abducting, holding individuals against their will to announce their agenda, raise their profile, negatively influence, disrupt, and degrade political will and the decision-making ability of a declared adversary. And it's extraordinarily effective. You want to talk about a crisis. I dealt with, every time there was a kidnapping in Iraq, I'd be dealing with the ambassador or their equivalent of the chief of station or head of their military directly on multiple cases, because every time someone was taken hostage, it can be Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea, doesn't matter. When it's publicly put out to the world and they tie it to a political thing, then all of a sudden your nation states are involved, and becomes very, very high profile. Hostages are used for the purpose of making public demands, raising awareness to the cause, or funds, extorting ransoms, or forcing concessions from nations or entities. And I'll get a little bit more specific about how much of an impact we had in Iraq on that. And I'm going to go pretty quick, and you guys are all smart kids, so I won't leave these slides up too long because I got a lot of information I want to get out. So U.S. policy on hostage taking. Now this is before most of you in the room were born, but how many of you are familiar with Desert One? Oh, well, Argo. How many of you have seen Argo? Everyone. Well, of course, Argo didn't talk about this story because those were the Americans that got out, but there were 53 Americans held hostage for over a year. U.S. Special Ops launched a raid, rescue attempt. Colonel Ken Curley was from one of the units that was involved in that operation, not to date him, but that effort failed, and it changed U.S. policy. Because let me tell you something, you guys have impressions, and I'm a Navy SEAL, Ken's a Army Ranger. You guys all have impressions, and now especially because Zero Dark 30 and stuff have come out, and we have that capability. I mean, we got 10th Mountain National Guard units right at Fort Drum that are probably more squared away at CQB than I was back at SEAL Team 3 back in the day. That's how much combat operation our military is today. We're at the tip of the spear. Back in the day, 25, 30 odd years ago, not as much, even at a very high level at Delta, which is what was involved in this operation. So we learned we don't make decisions to launch these rescue efforts, because if they go pear-shaped, they go pear-shaped. Second was Iran-Contra. We try to negotiate, if you guys understand Iran-Contra, we were trying to negotiate arms down to the Nicaraguan rebels to get hostages in Lebanon and Iran area released. So we learned that blew up in our face. So the U.S. government policy for the last 25, 30 odd years was we don't make concessions, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Which basically means if Americans kidnapped, you got one option and one option only. We're going to rescue you, but chances of us authorizing that rescue, probably not going to happen. In many cases, it will not, because they're very difficult to execute and they're fraught with potential disaster. So contrary to the image you guys all have that they just send our Navy SEALs or Army Special Forces off to do these rescue missions every day of the week and twice on Sunday, not so much, even though we're getting much better at it. So when I talk about VEOs, anyone heard of the term VEO? I don't know, the term may have changed already, but violent extremist organizations is kind of that overarching term to refer to Islamic terrorists to the FARC, violent extremist groups, so VEOs. And they look at kidnapping. It's an asymmetric warfare multiplier. It spends terror, sends a message of terror through the propaganda. You get more recruits to your cause, you raise ransoms, you get concessions. Low risk, high reward. In a place like Iraq and Afghanistan, they're targeting NGOs, they're targeting aid workers, people that don't run around with security. So they're easy targets. Because once they grab someone, they're grabbing a nationality. They're grabbing a pawn to be exploited. And it's, if you run around in high-risk areas with no security, you're an easy target. And so there were plenty of NGOs running around Iraq and Afghanistan and other parts of the world, Africa, without any security, because it goes against their moral ethical code in many cases, but it means they're very easy targets. So there's plenty of low-hanging fruit. And Westerners are worth millions of dollars, and governments have been paying those kind of ransoms. So, you know, and we all know that what you make in Africa and other places is not what you make in the minimum wage in the United States would make you a millionaire in some of these countries. So each kidnapping is a tactical event with strategic impact. And you guys ever heard about WMEs or WMDs, weapons of mass destruction? Well, we never found them in Iraq, right? But what we found were weapons of mass effect, and every kidnapping became a weapon of mass effect, and I'll get to some details about that. And understand something, everyone's a target. There's no more this, like, if someone's an aid worker or someone's a missionary or someone's just trying to help the locals, they don't care. Everyone is a target. No one is immune from getting targeted in certain parts of the world now. Okay, real quick, gonna make this, not spend too much time here, but we got the FARC here, and difference between, and again, extremist groups, VEOs, but for the political extremists like the FARC, they're usually structured in a military organization. They kind of have a chain of command. They will do kidnappings for the same reason. They're trying to raise awareness, but really trying to raise funding. They don't intend to kill the hostages unless they have to. That's not their intent. That's not the end game. And they're not necessarily suicidal. Whereas on the other side, these groups right here, Al-Qaeda and the like, religious extremists, they see it as divine calling. They see violence upon their victims as part and parcel of the larger war for them. And they accept martyrdom. They choose that path. So again, very distinct difference between two groups. But it parlays into, you know, how it impacted how we dealt with these kidnappings for so many years and continuing, even though they're not as in the numbers that they were, thank God. So I make the evolution that VEO kidnappings have evolved from kidnap and ransom to kidnap and kill, if they want to go to that extreme message. And it has had, you know, major complications for, you know, at a point where it got to where every kidnapping group in Iraq that grabbed someone, when they'd call the family to negotiate a ransom, which means they want money in the first place, but they would always say, we are Al-Qaeda, and we will kill your husband. So if you're a family and you know what Al-Qaeda is doing, how do you think you're going to respond? You're going to do everything you can to bring home your son or your father or so on and so forth. So it became a very effective tool, and everyone, of course, was Al-Qaeda. Just some of the headlines, and these can change. You can go and Google. I mean, this stuff happens, and some of these instances we're going to talk about just a little bit here. Obviously, we talked about Peter being killed. You guys remember the Bainbridge, USS Bainbridge, and the captain that was rescued by the SEALs? A good friend of mine was one of the snipers on that operation, so, you know, all good. We're doing some good stuff. Like I said, we can do anything. We have the ability to bring anyone home, but we have to have that actual intelligence plus all the authorizations to do that, and that sometimes can be as challenging as everything else. But you see some of the, you know, just look at some of the headlines, and it's expanded from Iraq to Al-Qaeda in northern Iraq, right? AQIM claims 6 hostages, and the latest, there was a a family, I don't know if you guys heard about this, but I was in Africa I just got home about 10 days ago. There was a family on holiday, family with 4 kids, captured, kidnapped by an Al-Qaeda affiliate in Cameroon. Think about that. A family. I mean, again, anyone is a target. There's no nobility, no morality that we can concept here in the West on who they will target. Anyone have an idea where that statement came from? Anyone want to take a guess? And when it came out? Zarqawi, Zawahiri, was it bin Laden? Does anyone recognize that statement? Who wants to take a guess and tell me who you think said that? Come on, Daniel. Who do you think?
idea.
But does it sound like some of those statements that have been coming out in the last couple of years?
Pretty similar.
Yeah. Any wild guesses before When the United States got formed, one of the first acts of our Congress was a decision to put up $15 million of the U.S. Treasury to pay the ransom, pay the tribute to the Barbary pirates off the coast of Tripoli, and to get free, sea lanes of communication for the U.S. to go over to Europe. If they didn't pay the ransom or the tribute, they would be attacked. So countries used to pay a ransom. Countries were paying ransom. Europe was paying ransoms. Anytime they went off the Barbary coast, they would pay the ransom so they wouldn't be attacked, like the American flagship wouldn't be attacked. So we sent Ambassador Thomas Jefferson over to London to meet the ambassador from the Barbary pirates, this Sid Haji Habirhan, and this is what he said to him, all right? So this problem we've had for many, many years goes back, hundreds of, one of the first acts of our country that we had to deal with foreign policy was hostage terrorism, or hostage, how we deal with this and this ideology, right? Now the irony is Captain Bainbridge had to go pay, so he had to take the tribute to the day the ruling king of Algiers in around 1800. And you know what's ironic? You know those Navy SEALs were on the ship when they took the shot to take out the hostage takers? They're on the back of the USS Bainbridge. Think about that for irony. I thought that was pretty cool. So again, you guys remember some of these pictures, right? Who can tell me what picture is this from? Now this was happening when you guys were about 15, 16, so hopefully you might not have been watching that, but anyone know where this picture was from? Abu Ghraib, absolutely. What about this picture? Or this one? Guantanamo, yep, good call. What about this gentleman? Anyone know who that is? Anyone? Same guy right here? Nick Berg? You guys remember Nick Berg? What happened to Nick Berg? Yeah. This kid right here, Kim Sun-il, I'm not making this up, after the invasion in Iraq, he decided to come to Iraq and go on like a walkabout. He literally was thinking, he was on a wartime tourism, walking around Iraq. He got grabbed and he was killed. And the Koreans weren't even in the coalition, but it didn't matter. So, and you understand the image they're sending from, we have Abu Ghraib there in an orange jumpsuit. So what are our prisoners in? American, Korean, doesn't matter. What are they counter-messaging back to us? See? So again, they're very savvy at this, and they have a message every time they do this. And here was an interesting story. France was not involved in the coalition. In fact, they made a point about not being involved in the coalition. And I don't mean to insult any French in here, because I have a brother-in-law who's French, and I just worked with some French special forces who were coming back from the fight in Mali, and I'm not disparaging the French. And you want to get in a fight with the Frenchmen, tell them they don't have any military legacy or honor, because not a smart thing to say. But right during the invasion, remember we were switching from French fries to freedom fries, right? Because the French weren't joining the fight, so they've got their butts kicked by the Huns in World War II and World War I. If it wasn't for us, they'd be speaking kraut, right? That whole mentality. Well, France had 2 hostages taken, 2 journalists were taken early on. And at the time, any Westerner being kidnapped was pretty much being kidnapped, and we were having beheading videos within 48 hours. I mean, it was terrible. And this one group that grabbed these 2 French hostages, they had kidnapped others, in fact 2 Romanians and some Bulgarians, and they were killed within a few weeks of the capture. And I was working these cases. But the French were not killed, even though they watched some of the other hostages being killed. And then they realized pretty soon, we're not going to get killed. And they finally got to know the head guy, the head kidnapper, and who was a jihadist. And they asked him, they said, well, why don't you guys kidnap an American and then trade him for some of your prisoners at Abu Ghraib? Why don't you do a swap? And the guy said to him, very coldly, he said, no. If we get an American, we want to cut their head off and put it on TV to instill shock and fear into the heart of the infidel. So that was their mentality. And France, at the time, They were the first country. They weren't working with us very closely initially because they were the ones that were just doing the, quote, wave the white flag and let's pay the ransom. And fortunately, they learned the hard way that once you make that concession and you send to the world and the Arab world and the jihadist world that you're going to pay a ransom and you're going to pay millions, what do you think the jihadists do on the internet? They're just like us, social media. They use the internet as much as we do. So the word spread very quickly. Hey, France pays, Germany pays, the Italians pay. We got 3 million, we got 5 million. And as much as the government can stand up there and say to the world's press, oh, we didn't pay a ransom, bullshit, pardon me. But, and it's on the web. So now everyone with a passport, everyone with a French passport or a German passport, anywhere in the world is now at target for kidnapping because the precedent has been set. And the French and others have had to learn the hard way that, you know, the U.S. policy, of which the Brits and Aussies and Canadians were in lockstep, the no concessions, was very challenging for them. So this was my world for 5 years, 2 years, folks. These are all major kidnapping cases from Iraq. I don't know if any of you guys, anyone recognize this lady? I know most of you are too young, so I'm not going to try and pull this out of you because I don't think too many of you know. But this woman, her name was Margaret Hassan. She was an Irish woman married to an Iraqi. Word is she had converted to Islam, but she was initially, you know, an Irish Catholic woman that she was the head of Care International in Baghdad. They called her the Mother Teresa of Iraq. There's 4 or 5 pillars of Islam, one of which is called zakat, which means giving alms to the poor. This woman lived the life of zakat. She was a beautiful person, a beautiful soul, was loved by thousands of poor in Iraq. She was kidnapped by this one group, and she was executed. They didn't care. And I read the chat room dialogue of these guys. To them, she was nothing more than an infidel, even though she was married to an Iraqi and been living the 5th pillar or 4th pillar of Islam. It didn't matter. I watched her execution on camera. Unbelievable. Matt Maupin, young soldier grabbed. His story was pretty well known. He was basically the face of our POW effort for many years and finally recovered 4 years later. Roy Hallams, an American contractor, former Navy man, kidnapped, held in a hole in the ground, literally in a dungeon with 10 other people in a small space about the size of, like from me here to the wall, about 4.5 feet high. I mean, I was in the place. It was unbelievable. But he was rescued after 311 days being buried in a hole in the ground by our Tier 1 unit, and only because of actual intelligence. Pretty fascinating story. I'm not going to get into it here. But some of you might know this girl. Jill Carroll. Anyone ring a bell with Jill Carroll? Anyone? Sir, you nodded your head. You remember that story?
Barely.
Okay. Again, you guys were probably still in high school, but Jill Carroll was a 28-year-old Christian Science reporter from Boston. She gets kidnapped, and all of a sudden it's a young American girl. And that story became huge. In fact, that's what prompted our big mission, MNFI, to finally take it very seriously and start going after these rings. Because for about 18 months, I'm beating my head up against the wall trying to get someone in our government. And folks, I gave presentations to every general and ambassador at the 2, 3, 4-star level in Iraq. I was phoned back and briefed at the agency, the Pentagon. I briefed for the National Security Council. And I couldn't get a national policy-directed decision to say, let's do something about this problem set, until a young female, like any of you girls here in the room, got kidnapped, and then all of a sudden it became a crisis. And then every time a video of Jill Carroll ended up on the news, Carl Rove, we all remember Carl Rove, he would call the Ambassador Quilzad and say, get this story off the news. What are you doing about solving this problem? And then in the last part of my tour, we got very serious, and in about 80 days, the kidnapping rings in Iraq, the one I'd been targeting, one in particular, got wiped out. And because of the drop Tara talked about from 400 kidnappings over 2 years down to 12, 2 years later, it's because we finally put troops to task on the problem set and we wiped it out. But it took about 18 months before we did anything about it, even though we had these stories and cases coming up daily. So this was the hostage working group. Quickly, the symbol, obviously, that's a black banner. It was my way of countering messaging to the enemy saying, you know, our first priority is rescue recovery hostages. Second is prevent future kidnappings. And 3, retribution, bring those responsible to justice. So those are my 3 priorities for the hostage work group, and why we're very simple focused on what our intent was. And we looked at all kidnappings as the same. I mean, I spent as much time working Iraqi cases as I did any others, and French and others. And that's ultimately why we were, I think, successful, because we weren't about just worrying about Americans or Brits. We were about the whole problem set. And we took a quote from Hannibal, who took 40 elements over the Alps. His motto was find a way or make one, and that's pretty much how we live by that motto every day. And those are obviously the cross swords from Baghdad. So another video real quick. I want to play this, and then we're going to talk about this one. There we go.
Wood. I'm 63-year-old. I'm an Australian, a US resident. My wife is an American. We have a house in Alamo, California. I came to Iraq more than a year ago, working with John Watkinson, and we had many jobs with the American military. My captors are fiercely patriotic. They believe in a strong, united Iraq looking after its own destiny. President Bush, Prime Minister Howard, Governor Schwarzenegger, family, friends, please help take the American troops, the Australian troops, the British troops out of here and let Iraq look after itself. They are strong. They will look after themselves against their neighbors. Please help me. I don't want to die.
So that video was handed to me on a CD earlier in the day. A young kid, a journalist at the New York Times, his security consultant called him up and said, hey, some 9-year-old kid walked up and handed this to us, and we put in the CD in our CD player, and boom. And that was how we find out about a lot of these kidnappings, because these videos, they were mass-produced and they were handed out to the media networks. And if you notice that he's an Australian citizen, did you notice some of the things about, he asked to actually help from Governor Schwarzenegger? Does that seem kind of odd? Did anyone pick that up?
But didn't say had a house in California.
His wife was American, living in California. And apparently they were divorced. But again, when they kidnapped him, they go through everything. They find out everything they can. And now, if his wife lived in, say, Nevada, would they have said governor? Now, who's from Nevada? Who's the governor of Nevada? Who? Yeah, I didn't know who that was. Does anyone know the governor of Nevada? They don't know the governor of any other state, but everyone knew who the governor of California was for a few years, right? Governor Schwarzenegger. So when that video went out and went to the web, you know what the demand was in the line? Australian hostage pleads for help from Governor Schwarzenegger. So they were smart. They knew that that was going to generate, headlines. And again, they're very savvy at this stuff. So again, just one of the things. Now, he was one of the lucky ones, because I remember briefing the Australian government. So the Australian government showed up, head of their SAS, the head of their, number 2 guy in their State Department. They came over to brief him, and I told them point blank, I said, he's an Australian, sir. I hate to tell you this, but he's probably going to get killed, because Brits, Australians, Americans were being beheaded within usually a couple days of capture. But the group that grabbed him, they wanted money, and they were negotiating with the family back in Australia for a lot of money, and he was rescued. Pretty amazing story. And the good thing was I got an invitation on the way home. I got to go through Australia on the way home because of it, because I basically told the Australian guys at the time, I said, okay, guys, I just want an official letter of invitation, so when I leave this place, when I decide to leave, I want a vacation to Australia on the way home. And I got 3 weeks into Australia with hanging out with some good friends, and I got to give these lectures to their military intelligence. It was a pretty good deal. So it worked out well for Doug and worked out well for me. But what we found is, again, Al-Qaeda even realized we're getting more bang for the buck to get money out of these guys than the simple beheading. And there was such a revulsion about the Margaret Hassan murder, the aid work I told you about, that even Zawahiri, number 2 in Al-Qaeda, sent a message to Zarqawi and said, knock this off. Stop these beheadings. You're not helping the cause. People are calling us extremists. People think that we're bloodthirsty, beheading jerks. Well, yeah, guess what? You are. But then they started realizing we can make so much money off this that we don't need to do the kidnappings, because we can make money off the ransoms and still get the strategic impact we're looking for. So again, these are some of the stats over my 2 years. 448 foreigners taken hostage. These are the numbers. 64% came home because they were probably ransomed out. 5%, less than 5%, and only a handful of actual rescues. I mean, really small handful. A lot of killed, a lot unknown. Iraqi kidnappings. Kidnapping was a country pastime. It became a cottage industry, and there were 300 kidnappings in Baghdad in a given month. It was out of control. And that number was significantly higher than 100 million a year. And so we were spending $8 billion a month to fight the war. They were raising hundreds of millions a year in ransoms. And the same organization that came up with, they also came up with a number of how much ransoms were being generated. They also estimated how much the insurgency was fighting, what it cost to fight us, i.e. add up all the RPGs, suicide bombings, payment to the family. They came up with a number. Anyone want to take a wild guess what the insurgency was spending to attack the U.S. coalition in a year? Anyone want to take a wild guess? It wasn't $8 billion a month. It wasn't $8 billion a month. It's like $21 million. asymmetric, you know. They were hitting us at all the key spots, and they were extraordinarily effective. Anyone want to take a wild guess? How many countries out of the 448? How many countries had a hostage taken and became that one weapon of mass effect? Anyone want to take an idea how many countries had people taken hostage over those 2 years? Take an educated guess. Alex, sir, you got your hand up.
All of them.
Close, very close. Over 70 countries, 65 to 70 countries had people taken hostage, out of control. So think about the impact from one country across board. So it impacted everything. It impacted our reconstruction effort. You know, you can look at the top 4 of the top 5, Turks, Jordanese, Lebanese, Egyptians. Wait a minute, they're kidnapping their own? Yeah, they don't discriminate. They don't care if Sunni, Shia, it doesn't matter. And it's part of the culture. I say they talk about the world's oldest profession. Well, in the Middle East, it's not prostitution, it's kidnapping. And it's part of the culture, it's accepted. So, and you got to go back in context in Iraq. Over Saddam's 23-year time in power, somewhere between 500,000 and 1.5 million, they don't know exactly, disappeared. So if you add up the math, you're talking over Saddam's reign, anywhere from 50 to like 112 people disappeared a night. Every day in Iraq over Saddam's 23 years in power, people were just disappearing. So you already had a culture and a country that was accustomed to people disappearing in the middle of the night. So you had the capability. You had their version of special forces and special police that were able to do this. And so they already had a ready and willing populace that was accustomed to it, plus the capability within the mindset, if you will, which adds to why this was such a crisis in Iraq. And you can see they took from all over the world. The majority of the people that were kidnapped were Arabs themselves. So they, again, did not discriminate against, you know, they didn't just target Westerners and infidels. They targeted anyone and everyone they thought they could make money off of or send a message. So American prospects, a little bit different. Most of the Americans never came home or unaccounted for. This was a kid that I spent 2 years of my life looking for, and we got a piece of his jawbone back to his father and family 4 years later. Matt Maupin, so I'm not going to get into it here. It was a pretty tragic story. Okay, how we doing on time? We've got the room until when?
10 to. So I'd say, why don't you go on for 10 to 15 minutes and then open it up for questions?
Okay, I've got it. Now, I can throw a video that talked about the one person we rescued. It's going to run about 8 minutes, and it's pretty informative. So if we have time for that, and then I'll wrap up with some closing slides, if that works. Or if we can go straight into finishing up the slides. So it's really...
Do the slides, because I think the audience is keen to start talking to you.
Okay, let's go. Then we're going to bypass this. But it's... this is on 60 Minutes. This was Roy Hallam's. Quickly tell you his story. He was grabbed in November 1st, 2004. Special Forces found him in September of 2005, and he'd been buried for a year in a hole in the ground with 9 other hostages. And the reason we connected all the dots, because my office was working with the Romanians and the French very closely at the time, and we finally put 2 and 2 together. We thought Roy was dead. We literally thought he was dead. We hadn't heard anything on him in 4 months. And he was captured with a Filipino national. And the Filipinos paid a ransom, got the guy out, and we interviewed him. And the first question was, well, when was the last time you saw Roy? And the guy said, last night. He was with me in the hole in the ground. And we're like, oh my God, Roy's alive. And that prompted our intelligence community got back on, and one thing led to the next. We were able to find his position, and he was rescued. And it's a pretty amazing story. And there's going to be an episode on Locked Up Abroad coming out this spring, and it profiles his story. So if you get a chance, pay a tune to Locked Up Abroad. So, Tar already talked about this, but here were the numbers. When we finally got focused on the problem set, the kidnappings dropped off, and this was a kind of composite of my 2 years. So when I got there in the summer of July of 04, there were 31 kidnappings. So my first month on the job, there was literally a new kidnapping every day. And these were foreigners, not the Iraqis. And it spiked to 54, and by the time I left, we were down to single digits. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but really it's because we finally put troops to task on the problem set. But it took us almost 2 years to finally get serious about the problem and address it. And then sometimes our government works much slower than you guys are probably accustomed to. And so the kidnapping trend was like that. And I figured, well, if I'm going to go for my next job application, I'm not going to do any better than that kind of trajectory. So I better leave now while I can get out with a getting's good, right? And I was done after 2 years. I kind of think I needed a break. I would argue that one of the reasons we failed in Iraq on a massive scale was because of this kidnapping threat. You know, the international perception of the war, the failing IO machine, brain drain of Iraqis that left because it was so dangerous. We had projects that never got completed because it was just too dangerous. So one of the key victories for the insurgency until we turn around with the surge, but even then, A lot of projects that went unfinished. A lot of money was spent in Iraq that we gained nothing from. So, but we're not here to talk about Iraq. But I'm arguing that kidnapping was very significant to one of the reasons we weren't nearly as successful as we had intended or hoped to be. You can see this is kind of a foreign objection of the trend. So as it dropped off in Iraq, it started spiking up in elsewhere, like Afghanistan and Pakistan. And some of the consequences, right? We had 2 French hostages. This French hostage right here, she was kidnapped, I'm sorry, German hostage. She was kidnapped. This is a pretty funny story. She gets kidnapped. The German government negotiates a ransom. They pay out, I think, $3 million or $5 million. She's in the German embassy in Baghdad, and she's taking a shower. Well, someone looked into her personal effects and found ransom Deutschmarks with the serialized numbers from the ransom payment. They figured out she was part of it. She'd lived in Iraq for years. She spoke Arabic. She was basically in on the deal. So she basically suckered the German government, you know, probably helped negotiate, and she got a little bit of a cut. And that's not out of the ordinary of some of these kidnapping cases. She goes back to Germany and gives these long-winded interviews. I mean, it became a catastrophe for the Germans because then they admitted a ransom came out. And what happened? 10 days later, 2 more German nationals were kidnapped in Iraq, and I ended up having to work that case. But when they asked the foreign minister about, you know, the fact that the ransoms might have been paid, he was asked, like, well, what was the impact on that? You know, the journalists were going about, you know, the payment of the ransoms. And his response was, the impact was, it wasn't the ransom payment. It was the fact that you talked about it, and you've now sent the message. And that's the other thing, the uncomfortable secret that French and Germans weren't paying ransoms. Well, cat was out of the bag, because now with Wikipedia leaks, I mean, everything is out there. There's almost nothing can be held secret anymore. And as the trends grew from 2007 beyond, we saw this stuff spread. Everyone heard it. You guys have, everyone's probably familiar about Mexico. Mexico was out of control. And you know what now is the calling card down in Mexico? Beheadings. Where did they get that? That's from Iraq. Same thing with Africa. Somali. Every guy's kind of aware of the Somali piracy issue. So in 2004, there were only 2 reported hijacking incidents. Now, 2004 is when I got to Baghdad, when the crisis went in Iraq. So as it spread to the worldwide that kidnapping is very successful, all of a sudden, by 2008, there were 800 hostages being held, being negotiated for ransoms. So it was a cottage industry. It was, again, blew up just as explosive as it was in Iraq. And again, we were challenged with international laws, trying to fight it. They were trying to basically build an international task force of 20 U.S. Navy ships and coalition ships to basically monitor trafficking from what would be the equivalent of New Orleans all the way up to Maine, out 500 miles out to sea. Now think about that, any of you sailors out here, that's a lot of Navy space, that's a lot of sea space to try and manage with 20 U.S. ships. And of course it became, at the end of the day, the industry itself just said, well, we've got to address this, and they started putting security contractors on the vehicles itself. This report just came out that finally it's on a downward trend, but still, 5-year low with only 297 ships attacked in 2012, compared with 439 the year before. Think about that. From 2004, there were 2 ships attacked. Now it's over, you know, up to 2. They think 297 is actually, wow, it's in a positive trend. So that's how much of an impact this has affected. And it affects sea lanes and shipping and so on and so forth. Some of you guys probably heard about Mumbai. It happened pretty recent. So this is part and parcel of their mindset. They will strategically plan with, they only had about, I think there were 12 to 15 guys that put the entire city of Mumbai in crisis mode for about 48 hours, 72 hours. So these are some of these trends, and they all share that kind of ideology. And anyone's a target. And again, this guy, the only survivor, said, I was told and instructed to kill whites, especially British and Americans. So those of you who travel overseas, be very careful. And I'll be honest, I'm a Navy SEAL. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've been in 50-odd countries around the world. Most of places are not friendly to us. But when I go out and I travel, my taxi driver, whatever city, he asks me where I'm from, I say Canada. I don't give him any reason. I go low profile, and I don't give any reason for, there is a different perception in the world towards Americans. Not probably as bad as it was a few years ago, but you have to just be very careful about signaturing yourself, and because the world is a very different place now, especially for us, especially for the West, and especially for Americans. So I'm going to close out. I'm almost about to close out, but this is a video. This is the 7, the family I told you about, that were just taken hostage in the last few weeks in Cameroon. All right, so listen, we're not going to listen to this whole thing, but I just want you to pay attention to down here, because you're going to be able to read.
Nous avons été arrêtés par Ali Souna Ali Dawati Wael Jihad.
This is the father.
Libération des frères de Alessuna, Lidawati ou Al-Jihad emprisonnés au Cameroun. Ils veulent la libération des femmes de Alessuna, Lidawati ou Al-Jihad.
And these are the 4 kids with the faces obviously blotched out.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي جعل الجهاد عبادة وجعله لعباده من أعظم العبادة بشرهم بإحدى الحسنيين إما النصر وإما الشهادة الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فنقول لرئيس فرنسا نحن جماعة أهل السنة للدعوة والجهاد التي يلقبونها ببوكو حرام هي التي تجاهد في بعض بلاد أفريقيا التي تسمى بنيجيريا نحن الذين أمسكنا هؤلاء الأفراد السبع هم رجلين وامرأة و4 أولاد بين حدود نيجيريا والكاميرون لبعض أغراضنا منها أولا فليعلم رئيس فرنسا قام بحرب الإسلام.
He's talking about the French incursion into Mali. France are in Mali, so they grabbed him in Cameroon. So
وليعلم أننا قد انتشرنا في كل مكان لإنقاذ إخواننا المستضعفين.
So what happens in Mali, and that's how they see this. They see this as a war. It's a war of religion for them. You know, we used to say the word crusade and we get everyone up in arms. But for them, it's a war. It's a religious war. That's how they see it. So they can grab hostages in Cameroon to support their brothers in Mali. And that's the ideology. And anyone is a target for this. And the positive notes, and it's really a shame, but France kind of learned their lesson the hard way. And the thing I have to tell people when I was in Iraq, when someone came to me, an ambassador or the representative of a foreign country, the first thing I would tell them, your first starting point is that hostage, they're dead. So start from that as the reality of what you're dealing with. And it's a terrible thing to say. I had a lot of sleepless nights, and it took me a long time to kind of get over some of this stuff because of the stuff I had to deal with. But that's the sad reality that France now has learned. I mean, France just went into Mali. They have 15 French nationals being held on the African continent right now by these various groups. And they just executed, when I was over there, they executed one of the French hostages. And this family, I wouldn't put it past them. They will execute this family, at least the father. They'll probably start with the father. I mean, think about that, folks. And these people are being held hostage as I'm giving this lecture here today. Very, very challenging. But the French have gotten on, I mean, it's tough, but they've gotten on board the American concessions policy, ruling about talks. They basically said, we're not going to negotiate. And they're launching forces to try and do a rescue and a raid, which has now become their only option because they know that paying out these multi-million-dollar ransom has only increased the threat to every French national from Iraq now to Cameroon. So those of you thinking about going on a safari somewhere in Africa, you might want to check a little bit about the situation on the ground before you travel there. In Africa now, folks, not just the Middle East. So I close with this example. In the beginning of the crisis, we had kidnappings that were happening. All the trucking companies were being grabbed, and there was a truck that was grabbed coming from Jordan into Baghdad, I think. And the group grabbed like 7 hostages, including this kid from Somalia, okay, which is a Muslim, right, obviously, Ali Ahmed Musa. Okay, so, and they were reported that we're going to behead these guys unless you give in to our demands. Well, the word got back from a Somali warlord that basically said, if you kill our Somali brother, we will hunt down every Iraqi in Mogadishu and we will behead them. And rumor is there's still a couple thousand Iraqis of Iraqi descent in Mogadishu. Now, how many of you think a Somali warlord would not carry out that threat? You think they'd probably carry out that threat? Yeah, you're correct. If they, the Iraqis, behead our loved ones, we will behead their loved ones. And inshallah, the next day the militant group announces, oh, we have released our Somali brother. He is a good Muslim. We have let him go. So again, it's about messaging. And this is how the terrorist world, the jihadist world, this is how they negotiate with us. That's their way of sending messaging. And it was a very effective tool, and it continues to be. And it's something that is, perplexing our policy. We have now done more hostage rescues, and they've only been a handful in our history. And in fact, that piracy incident where the SEALs saved the captain, that was the first time first time in the history of that command, of that Special Operations Unit, that Navy SEAL team, they were chartered specifically for hostage rescue at sea. That was one of their justifications charters. And that was the first time since they were formed in like the 1980s, 25 years later or something, to the fact that they were actually they were authorized to go execute a mission they were established to deal with. So think about that. We have the capability to bring anyone home, but I can tell you, lining up all the things that need to launch and send our best special ops unit in the world to go after an American, it comes into play with a lot of things, and it's easier said than done. But other countries have recognized, that is the option, that is the face, or that's the only option is to confront this thing head on. Because if you make the concessions to terrorism, all you're asking for is more attacks in the future. So, with that note, I think we're down to questions, and we still got time for questions if you have them. Sir.
I talk about a lot about the religion and how it's based on that, but at the very top, how much of it do you think is religion is really behind it, and how much of it is just used as a tool to gain followers?
I mean, they're believers. I mean, they believe that they're called. I mean, there's comment. They quote the Hadith and they use that. But at the same token, they'll take money out, but they're not. They can have secular aims, but at the end of the day, it's their ideology. I mean, for them to kill Margaret Hassan and think. I mean, I read the chat room discussions. The comments about Margaret Hassan, who is, I mean, this is one of the most beautiful women on the planet. And it wasn't just the guys that killed her, it was the attitude in the Islamic world, not in the entire Islamic world, obviously. Hundreds and thousands of Iraqis were so upset about Margaret Hassan's murder. I'm not painting every Muslim into this corner, but it's their religion that gives them doctrine to smite them at their heads. That's where the whole beheading comes. They think they're doing it straight. They're guided by the Quran to do these things to Westerners. And so at the end state, for the first part, Al-Qaeda, they wanted to kidnap an American for one purpose, to behead them and send that message imagery. And then they realized, well, wait a minute, we're losing the IO campaign war, so let's stop doing this, and now let's get money out of them. But they have no problem killing people. They're still doing it. I mean, I don't know how this family situation is going to evolve. The French just launched a rescue mission a couple months ago in Africa, and the hostages were killed, one of the French soldiers was killed and was left on the scene. So it is very challenging. We've had rescue missions with our national Delta and SEAL Team 6, and they threw a grenade. The grenade killed the hostage, and we just had a SEAL get killed on a rescue mission not 2-3 months ago. So it's very challenging. I don't know. Question?
On that same note, obviously there's a lot of Muslim
Of course.
as well.
Absolutely.
How do they counter the more radical?
Well, you know why Iraq turned? The Iraqis themselves were so fed up by these kidnappings. They were literally the reason. I mean, the reason the surge was effective is that the Iraqis themselves got tired of Al-Qaeda coming into a village and beheading their sons and men. That's what turned it. I mean, at the end of the day, the only way we're going to, well, first off, we need to look at this and say, yes, it is about religion, but let's force the Iraqis to counter this in, hey, this is, you can't justify this. I mean, and that's, my most effective ally, the reason we were successful was because my relationship with an Iraqi cop who was, now's the time to drop, an inappropriate comment. This guy was bad. I can't even, I like to say how I usually describe him. This guy was just a badass, bottom line, fearless. He went anywhere in Baghdad. And he was my friend. He was a Sunni. He was a Muslim. But he knew these guys were wrong. And he countered them the way we needed to counter them. I mean, he would single-handedly bring some of these guys in on himself. And he was the guy, every time we had a kidnapping, he was who I turned to. I mean, all the intelligence communities, the other guys they looked at me like, how do you have all this information? And it was because of a friendship with this guy. And I have law enforcement officers were like, well, he was your source, right? So what were you paying him? I never paid Sammer a dime. In fact, the only time I handed him any money is he came into the green zone to see me one day. He's in a black BMW, which is what all the bad, evil guys used to drive in Iraq. So the guard sees this guy coming in a black BMW, freaks out, pops his tires, right? Pops up the, whatever you call those things. So Sammer was coming to meet me. He's late. He's very upset. He calls me, and I said, "What's wrong, Sammer?" And he goes, "Well, I'm at the front gate. My car. I'll take care of it." So I drive down there and get some soldier trying to give him a little piece of paper that says, "Sir, you can file a claim for this, and you get your tires reimbursed." Now he's got a Pirelli tires, and I go, "Sammer, how much are these things?" And he's like, "Oh, they're $250 each." I'm like, I'll file the claim for you. I'll take care of it. So I went to the military, tried to file the claim, and I started getting paperwork. And I'm like, you know what? I went out, wrote it, cashed the check out. Next time I see Sammer, hand him $500. And he goes, Dan, Mr. Dan, I don't want your money. I go, Sammer, it's not my money. I filed the claim. I take your money. All right. Thank you, Mr. Dan. That's the only time I paid him money. And that was out of pocket. But that's not because I didn't pay him for anything. He wanted to do the right thing. I call it this. For example, Sammer calls me up one day. Some of my best sources were media. And I used to hate the media. I'm a soft guy, man. We don't talk to the media. In my first meeting in Iraq, when we formed the working group, I briefed the group and I said, folks, we have 3 priorities here. I said, our number 1 is rescue hostages. Number 2, prevent kidnappings. Get the word out so people don't put themselves in a situation. Number 3, bring those responsible to justice. Like, let's hunt down these sons of bitches and let's kidnap the kidnappers. And I'm a Navy SEAL, man. I know what we can do. And I've just left Central Command as a special ops advisor to SOCCENT. So, I mean, I'm like 2 years back in the show with the boys, and I'm like, we can do this. But what happened is U.S. government wouldn't do anything about kidnapped victims from around the world because they're like, wait a minute, it's not our problem. We take care of our own. And that was the mentality. And this Australian head of intelligence was in the room, and he said, because I said, we should hunt these guys down. Let's get that actionable intelligence and do something about it. So the Australian guy comes up to me after the meeting and says, Dan, well, if you want to find out who's doing the kidnapping, there's this guy, there's this journalist. He's done embeds with Al-Qaeda. He could probably tell you who's doing this stuff. You should talk to this guy. His name's Michael Ware, and he's the bureau chief for Time magazine. And as soon as he said Time magazine, I go, I'm not going to talk to that guy. That guy wants us to lose this thing. I hate the media. I'm not going to talk to him. Well, lo and behold, when Joanna Sergrania got kidnapped, and I went to meet my contact with the security with the New York Times, who was a former soldier, he introduced me to this guy, this big, huge guy. They're outside the gate. We meet up and talk about the kidnapping, and my contact goes, yeah, you got to meet Mick. He knows all about the kidnapping yesterday. And the guy's like, yeah, mate, I had my photographer there. You got to give me a call, mate. Hands me his card, and it's Michael Ware, Time magazine bureau chief. And I'm thinking, I think I'm going to talk to you now. So 2 hours later, I'm meeting him in a, off-site place, and I have an embassy official with me. He's the head of their Italian intelligence. And there's Michael Ware, this Italian photographer. And over the next 2 hours, I got more information from these 2 journalists, unbelievable, than I got from the CIA and the FBI in a year. And I'm like, man, maybe I need to start talking, broaden my scope on this. And that's kind of how this problem set. I mean, and I'm bringing this back full circle because Michael Ware at one point went to Haifa Street when Al-Qaeda took over. They had all the black banners out on the street. He's 6'4", 6'2", 6'3". He played professional rugby in Australia. This guy is, stand up, sir. He's about your height. He's even a little bit, he's taller than him, and he looks like him. He's a Westerner. He's a big guy, and he's in the back of a car going through a protest with his little camera filming this protest, reporting live from the field. Like, talk about idiots and talk about fearless guys. Journalists are some crazy, crazy folks. And of course, they look in the car, they see a camera, which makes them freak out because the locals think it's CIA or somebody, and then they pull the guy out of the car, and they pull out this big, huge 6'4" Yank, well, not Yank, but Westerner, infidel. And they put a gun to his head. They're going to kill him. And the driver, his security guy, says, you cannot kill Michael. He is protected by Colonel Aisha. Now, Colonel Aisha was a former Saddam soldier, Fedayeen. He was he was one of their bad guys, one of their special forces intelligence officers. Now, when we invaded, he went to go fight against us, so he started killing American soldiers and killing Iraqis who were supporting the Americans. And he owned Haifa Street. That was his neighborhood. So Michael is on his knees with a gun to his head while his driver calls Colonel Aisha, hands the phone to Al-Qaeda, and the colonel tells him, you kill him, I will wipe you out. He is mine. He is protected. Do not touch him. All right, get out of here. And that's the only reason he's driving. Now, because again, they have relationships too. And Colonel Aisha used Michael Ware to get messaging out. They wanted to get counterinsurgency messaging out, and he had given his word, you are protected in my neighborhood, Mr. Ware. So that's how the game works. Well, about a year into my tour, I get a call one day from Sammer going, hey, there's this guy. I need to know how much he's worth because one of the guys in his unit has seen one too many Muslims killed, murdered by this guy. He's a bad man. He's a very bad man. He's a former Saddam Fedayeen guy. I need to know how much he's worth, so if I can, I'll bring him in. I'll get the ransom. I'll get the, what do we call it, reward money. But I need to know I have enough money to get him and his family out to Jordan. What's this guy worth? So came back, guy was worth a little bit of money, good bit of money. But it would have paid off a couple of your student loans, actually. Well, maybe not law school loans, but a lot of money. So my buddy Samer, as I said, the guy an Iraqi had a come to Muhammad moment. He realized this is wrong. Kidnapping, beheading, killing innocents is wrong. So he came forth and turned this guy in, and of course the guy got rolled up. So he rolls the guy up, and he's a hero, and I'm like, good on you. And then I meet with my friend Michael Ware. We used to meet kind of regularly. I'd smoke cohibas, he'd smoke Marlboros, and we'd sit there and have a beer at this little cafe. We'd do it before anyone showed up, and that's how we'd have our meetings. So Michael meets up with me, and he's like, and again, I can't use the word, but he goes, mate, I'm screwed, mate, I'm screwed. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, Dan, you remember telling you that story when I was pulled out of the car, and Colonel Aisha is the guy that saved my life because Al-Qaeda was going to kill me? He goes, he just got rolled up this week. So I lost my protection. And I'm going, really? He goes, you know who did it, don't you? And I go, Mick, I don't know what you're talking about. So sometimes you got to play that game. It was kind of pretty interesting. So I don't think I answered your question, but that was pretty funny story. All right, who else has got something? I think we got 5 more minutes, 2 more minutes.
If I can just interject, you said something at a meeting last night that I think does answer this question, and that is where it was that that tipping point in the Second Iraq War, where we lost the opportunity to co-opt Iraqi Muslims onto the side of...
Well, at the very beginning, bottom line is we disbanded, you know, everyone knows this, we disbanded the Army. I mean, Colonel Curley was there. He was Paul Bremer's chief of staff. I mean, he can tell this, he can answer better than I can. But, you know, when we fired every Ba'athist and said they can't come to work, well, guess what? The Ba'athists not only were soldiers, they were cops, they were school teachers. So we basically took everyone with the likes of this colonel and my background and Ken Curley and said, you're all fired. And law professors that were if you were a Ba'athist, member of the Ba'athist Party, Tara, you wouldn't be teaching anymore.
You don't want to make the law professors mad.
Well, guess what? So the Ba'athist was part of the society, so we fired everything that had run that. You want a job as a civil administrator, you want a job as a soldier or as a cop, you're going to be in the Ba'athist Party. And when we unilaterally came out, because it sounded good in Western media, right? It sounds good. Don't hire the Ba'athist because Saddam was a Ba'athist. That means all Ba'athists are evil, right? How do we think we rebuild Germany after World War II? We hired the Nazis that weren't mangling all these, you know, truly.
Jumping on this one point about Mr. Bremer, because you're all going to be in this situation, most of you are a lot younger than me in this room. You're all going to be in leadership positions, and you're all going to be paid to think, decide, and lead, okay? Mr. Bremer made a decision. It was not made at the White House. It was made by Mr. Bremer based on his experience. And they gave him a lot of latitude there. It was a bad decision. And it impacted on the entire country. We went from people that were hugging us and kissing us and running around with American flags to like, what are these guys doing here? And then we got to a situation where Christian Iraqis and others were getting beheaded and standing pointed out. Mohammed al-Bunia, who's one of the largest businessmen, Colonel Carey knows all about this, there's a lot of business guys that got pulled in. And initially, there was in a room about 96 of them. I was there from 03 to about 07, 08. And I went through the chief's position, and then we went into the private sector, and we wound up guarding American generals and did some other things, logistics and what have you. But in the beginning, they took 96 of and you're not going to get this anywhere, 96 of the most capable business folks in Iraq, put them in a room like this. They all got individual cell phones with a 914 exchange. We put NCI over there. So calling Iraq or calling home to America was like calling, you know, from West Point to Poughkeepsie over here. It was a 914 exchange. They all got individual cell phones. And they had one of these heavy breathers come in from Wall Street, and he was going to be responsible for the rebuilding the economic structure of the country. Got up. These are people that survived jail, beatings, everything you can imagine that Dan talked about in the Saddam administration. Just for them to come to this meeting, it was a big risk. So we got up, we being America, got up, we being the coalition, said we're going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and everybody said, great, we need A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. That guy lasted 2 days and quit because his living conditions weren't good enough to go back to Wall Street. A lot of people that were appointed to go over there that came from Michigan State, I shouldn't use Michigan State, but they came from different, the president put out the word, we got to rebuild Iraq, we need help. They showed up and they quit. The next time we had that meeting, and I was in 4 of these, the next time 50 people showed up The third meeting was 20, and the last time it was 10, and each time it was a heavy breather, private sector, former CEO, Wall Street, multi-millionaire coming in to fix the problem. Okay? Those 4 meetings happened in less than 60 days. Okay? They're trying to rebuild the country. They look at us, and this goes back to the leadership point Dan was addressing. We have to be who we say we are. You have to be who you say you are as a future lawyer, regardless if you're in the public or private sector. You have to assume that risk as leaders. I acknowledge this colonel's active duty service. These are the heroes that are out there doing it. I went over there, I was General Schwarzkopf's aide, I got a phone call, I was in a great job. I went over there to be a hamster, and I wanted to get involved in some other things. Dan's a reservist, he got activated. We linked up over there. This guy right here is a hero. He saved more lives than I can tell you. I'm not a hero, and I've been around him. You guys and gals are the future leaders that are going to come out of this institution that does a lot more than play basketball, lacrosse, and football. You have to put your stamp on America, and it's got to be a leadership stamp. A lot of good people over there believed in us, and with all our might, the only people that showed up were 2 organizations, DOD, DOS a little bit, and USAID, which did a phenomenal job. You want to get something involved and make a difference, USAID. Then we had the FBI guys that did great things. I'm going to talk about the classified stuff. But as a nation, agriculture, energy, all that stuff didn't show up, and we just didn't get it done. Now, they didn't step it up to the degree they could, but they counted on us. And so there's a leadership lesson in all this, and I just want to share that point with you. Bremer made a bad decision. And it's going to be historical, and it's sad. A lot of people killed as a result of it.
We have to start wrapping up, and I cut off the student who had a question, so why don't you go for it?
You talked about the psychological effects that these hostage takees have, but I was wondering if you could talk about the effects that successful hostage rescues have, not only for the country of the nationals that are being taken hostage, but the effect that the really, really rare, as you pointed out, successful hostage rescues have on those that are taking hostages.
Well, bottom line is you have to send a message. I mean, here's the shame of it. You know, I built up a network on this sheikh. Remember he telling that Joanna Sergenu went to the Baghdad University? This professor of Islamic study, basically a college professor, was the imam of the mosque, and this was a guy that was in charge. I called him CEO of Baghdad Inc., Baghdad Kidnapping Inc. He was the CEO. This guy, I had this guy nailed. I had his picture. I had where he worked. I had 12 of his henchmen. We could have rolled this guy up, but we couldn't get anyone to do anything about it until this young girl, what could have been your older sister, was kidnapped. And then all of a sudden, U.S. forces were given the go-ahead, and the British went after one ring, our boys went after the other, and in 80 days, every morning my special ops guy, the SF guy, Army guy, good friend, would call me up and be like, yeah, we rolled up 5 more guys last night, and they're waking up on their phones today going, they got Muhammad last night, what do we do, what do we do? And they had 2 options with Joe Carroll. They could have, like all the other cases, they could kill them, bury the person in a hole in the ground, and then run. Or if they were smart, and I said this to my FBI counterpart, I said, if they're really smart, they're going to let this girl go and try and get some windfall back and not get, because if they killed her, we're coming. Matt Maupin was kidnapped and murdered within 10, 12 days probably of his capture. 9 months after his capture, 10 special forces went into the neighborhood. You know how it started? That CNN's film of these guys celebrating with the convoy that was attacked in the background. Matt Maupin was in this convoy, 25 vehicles. He was one of 5 Humvee soldiers. He was grabbed, murdered. But there would be the guys running around, there was a guy running across the screen holding up shoes of Thomas Bell, a contractor for KBR. He was a truck driver. He's holding up his workman boots, his Wolverine boots, celebrating in front of the camera, going la 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 la. 33 seconds across the screen, but that was enough, and that guy got rolled up, in addition to 28 other boys, other individuals involved. So if you don't think we're coming to bring justice, especially when it's a soldier, we're coming. Our boys are coming. Our Army boy or Navy, SF and SEAL we'll come and get you. But and the Jill Carroll incident, because she was released. Here's the irony. My last day in Baghdad, my contract or my job ended at the end of March, and I extended it by 1 day because I wanted to go home on April 1st. Literally, 2 years in Iraq, I said, I'm going to go home on April Fool's Day because I'm like, I just lost my life. I mean, I had some all kinds of personal stuff. I'm not going to get into this drama story here or you all be buying me beer. But I just said, I'm leaving. We're still trying to get Jill Carroll home. We're in the middle of the fight. We're having success, but she's still missing. Her best friend and I became very close, and but we don't know if we're going to get her back. And I walked into my last meeting in Iraq, Thursday. It happened to be a Thursday. It was March 30th. The next day was April 1st, and I was supposed to be on a plane from Bayap home. I was going to leave Iraqi airspace on April Fool's. And all of a sudden, I walk in the meeting, and right as the meeting kicked off, someone ran in and said, they just released Jill Carroll. She's at a Sunni politician's office. They're doing an interview with her right now. They're giving her gifts and awards, and she was told, the politician called the ambassador and said, Jill Carroll was in my office. Would you like to get her? And she was told by the kidnappers that said, if you go to the green zone, we're going to kill you, because we have spies in the green zone. So they want her to go to the airport, go home. So we're figuring out what to do, and next thing you know, we made some things happen, and 40 minutes later, she walks into the embassy, drives into the embassy with our boys. They picked her up. And I tell you, I don't know if it was God sending me this message, like, hey, you're done. I mean, there were 448 kidnappings. I mean, most of these people didn't come home. And I can tell you, from me personally, and from the fact that the numbers went off from 200, 300 a year down to 12, because we sent the message. So it had the impact. And even more importantly, the reason the surge was successful is because finally, Americans and Iraqis, the sons of Iraq, they partnered up side by side. And like Colonel Curley was saying, we finally started to do what we said because it was leadership. And for all of General Petraeus' failings that have obviously come out, that guy is the reason. He came with a counterinsurgency strategy that ultimately gave us time and space to get out of Iraq. And not enough credit. There was two reasons we were successful in Iraq. Because we came up with a strategy that was going to co-opt the Iraqis themselves to partner with them against a bigger threat, which was al-Qaeda. Plus, we had a counterinsurgency strategy under General McChrystal that was wiping these guys out. And it was a combined. So we finally we stood up and began, we're going to take care of your problem, meaning you have to give us information where the bad guys are. We'll take care of them for you. And when the Iraqis finally saw us doing that, and not the kind of stuff that Colonel Curley saw in the initial, and I'm sure the Colonel here has got plenty of experiences to share, but when we basically stood up and started doing what we said we were going to do, is how we turn around, and the force multiplication of getting intelligence and everything else was multiplied multiple times, which, Iraq, who knows if it's going to be that long-term democratic success. I mean, history will tell. But if we had left Iraq in 06, like we were on the way out, there would be a much more catastrophic situation in that part of the world. And not that it's not doing great, but it would be much worse today had we not done the surge strategy and done the counterinsurgency campaign, saying what we were going to do. So I don't know if that answers your question, I hope.
Well, I think we've got plenty more to talk about, but no time to do it. So we have to take the show on the road. But join me, please, in thanking